All right. Just wanted to give a brief introduction into this one, as this episode was kind of based around the new Razorlight film coming out. Little poster there, probably. So yeah, Razorlight Fall to Pieces. I was approached by the director Ben Lowe a couple of years ago now about including a clip from the podcast actually with Conor McNicholas, in which he talks about Razorlight, and particularly when he talks about them playing a rooftop in Hackney. So that was a cool thing to happen for the podcast, and it's eventually got released on Friday the 31st of January this year. And in order to promote the film, Ben arranged to come on the podcast with Andy Burrows of the band. And here's the episode. The film's definitely worth watching, in my opinion, and I'll put a link to it in the description. So yeah, have a look and let us know what you think in the comments. No, mate, you all right?
Hello, Harry. Good to see you, mate.
And you, yeah. Been a long time coming.
It has. It's felt like a long time coming. The release, the process of getting everything signed off, so we could put things like your Conor McNicholas clip at the top of the film. Yeah, mate. It
Yeah,
has
yeah.
been a long time coming, but really
How
nice.
much can you talk about that out of interest?
I think alongside a fairly strict contract that I had to sign in the end with EMI, I'll be as loose as I can be.
Okay.
Certainly I can obviously talk really loosely about the filming experience and bits that happened that kind of might be interesting in around like kind of the um, build up to it and the ins and outs. I know that ultimately there's no better man to get an insight than from Andy on the process. Obviously, he was not part of it to begin with, and then came into the film as it developed naturally. So, hello, Andy.
Hello, am I late?
Nah, it's all good, mate.
No, mate.
Could I be annoying and get you to go landscape, Andy? Is that all right?
Go what? Oh,
Land,
landscape. Oh, right. How
if
do you get
possible.
that?
Nice one.
Did
Have
you
been...
get into the darts over
I was gonna say,
here,
like,
Andy, or is it a long time? Are you well ahead of the Luke Littler? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. The Littler phase.
the new, yeah.
fair play.
Maybe.
Where are you both in London type thing?
Ben is. I'm not.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm in the countryside.
Ah,
Very
nice.
What about yourself?
I'm up in Manchester because I just saw you're playing around the corner from me in summer actually,
Oh,
in Altrincham or something, at the Brit Fest or something. Is it called?
really?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, that'd be fun. I don't know what that is.
Might have to come see
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
Altringham's popular with the footballers, right? It's
Oh
Wilmslow
yeah,
and Altrincham, I think, are the two hotbeds for crazily paid footballers of the modern era.
and Alderley Edge and that in Cheshire. Yeah.
What's
Anyway,
that? What's that? Is that a festival?
what's that?
Is that a festival? Is it
Britfest.
Britfest?
Yeah, you're playing with like UB40,
What?
10C, 10cc. But mind you, these are all different days, so you might be on different days. It's like a 3 day thing, I think.
Oh my gosh! All right.
Doing your manager's job here.
Yeah, yeah. What? By the way, what's the date? What's the date of that?
It's on the 4th, 5th, and 6th of July. Do you want me to find out exactly what day you're playing?
Yeah, can you tell me where we're staying?
Does it say what day? Oh, you're on the Friday with Chesney Hawks.
Oh, well, that sounds about right.
Republica, Roachford, the Boo Radleys, and Top Loader.
Oh, fantastic.
Not a bad day, that is it?
That's
Sounds top quality, that.
Okay, so well, I suppose I've just been watching the film and stuff, so very in the Razorlight headspace. But to get a bit of context and everything, so it's not really documented in the film much, Andy, of like how you actually ended up being in the band and what was the build up to that.
In the first place,
Yeah, like how did you actually end up being in the band and what was the build up towards that type thing?
um, well, the original drummer he quit sort of fairly early on, before the first album came out, and so they put ad in the NME looking for a drummer. But I hadn't seen that. I'd been doing some drumming for a producer called Julian Standen, whose main claim to fame was that he produced the Lemonheads rendition of Mrs. Robinson, the Simon Garfunkel track, Miss Robinson.
Oh, yeah.
And he couldn't pay me. I was like testing out his drum room or whatever, and he said, I'll send an email to my industry contacts. And I thought that was a bit of a sort of a wanky cop out, like, all right, I'd prefer 200 quid personally. But I drove home that day, and by the time I got home, I had an email saying that there was a band looking for a drummer, like a serious band. And it was just this band called Razorlight. So I went down to W.H. Smith's and bought the NME, and I saw that picture of Johnny, like, I'm better than Bob Dylan vibes. And I was a bit scared, to be honest with you, because they were clearly quite, they were on the up, and it seemed like a bit of a jump, Anyway, that one thing led to another, and in the end, I went and did the audition. Turned out I'd met Johnny before. And it was all quite surreal. It was a very odd weekend. It was a very life-changing weekend, where literally it went from me having no job and nothing to being on top of the pops within about 2 weeks. It was it was crazy times, crazy naughty times.
Yeah. And I think you described it as Johnny having a fire in his eyes. Is it kind of just hit the ground running type vibe?
Absolutely. I've never known a man with so much fire in his eyes and such a firework up his bum. Amazing.
Excellent. And then Ben, like, how and why did he decide to do the film, basically?
Where did it come from? So it was a TV commissioner at BBC who very kindly recommended me and said that I'd be ideal to make a taster with Johnny. I think they were thinking at the time that there was a story to be told about how high he got in his celebrity and in rock and roll, and he represented a lot of the scene. And then, career just went off in lots of different directions, and had I think a lot of interest in the world and the mystery around him and the quotes and lots of stuff. So they just got me in to make a taster with him. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned, is that I kind of went into it apprehensive, despite not actually having any friends of mine that had spent time with him. I kind of went into it way too much on his reputation, and went in thinking it could be a tricky day, and was so amazed at how easy it was, how secure he was in his personality. He was very charming and funny. So I think at the end of that sort of first day of filming with him in Brighton, it was like, I don't know where this is going, but you just get a feeling. You get a feeling like there's something cooking here. And then as the film developed very organically, Bjorn had rejoined the band. Bjorn was the original guitarist, and that's where it started to sort of simmer that it might lead to something more. But I knew that without getting Carl's side of the story, who is the original bassist, the fellow Swede, with Bjorn, and Andy's, it would never really be a fair telling of actually when it was at its kind of glorious, what actually was going down. So I had some friends who knew Andy, and I was kind of around Andy on a Muse tour, and he had a really brilliant aura. And I just thought it's worth just trying, even if it's a very polite, no way, I just couldn't do it. If you don't ask, if you don't shoot, you don't score. And Andy was kind enough to we just had lots of phone calls and just got to know each other a bit.
Yeah. I mean, how influential were you in terms of linking Andy up with Johnny type thing?
He was 100% influential as far as I'm concerned. Sorry to butt in.
No, go for it.
Ben, as far as I'm concerned, we wouldn't, without meaning to sound over dramatic and to 2006 about it, like when I started speaking to Ben, and he was saying that there was a chance that Johnny and I would talk, at that point I was like, there is zero chance that will happen, Ben. I remember saying to Ben, there isn't a chance in hell of that happening, mate. So good luck with your film and stuff. But it's not going to happen. And Ben persevered, and yeah, I think he was the absolute reason as to why the two of us got back in together, into a room together.
Yeah, I suppose I came at it from a fan's perspective. Like, I had the records that there was some of my early gigs that I was able to go to, and spending that time with Johnny in the present day, and then getting to know Andy. And I think, as Andy's just described, it was like I was using him for research as much as anything, because he had like the most extreme firsthand of I'm watching archive footage of Andy on the bus with the Bjorn, Carl, and Johnny, but Andy was there. Like, what I mean? Like, I'm getting the absolute best firsthand telling of what it was actually like. So I think there was so many phone calls, and I remember like walking around London fields together and just hanging out, really, because I think this is all like built on trust, and there was never any grand plan to get Johnny and Andy together. But because I'd spent good time with Johnny and had only positive experiences, I'd spent decent time with Andy at this point, had only lovely experiences of Andy. It was kind of, I did feel like I was in the middle, and I felt it was breaking my heart that there just wasn't actually the respect for each other. I kept thinking, you guys have been through this like fantasy, insane experience together, so young as well, like in your 20s, and experienced so much. And I kept thinking, like, be like cool though if you guys like nodded at each other and were like, yeah, we did that, and we did that together, we wrote those songs together, and we did those shows. So I think for me it was just probably this fairy tale in my heart of like, wouldn't it be cool one day if they were up for like, just hanging out. And it was never really to do with the filming, and that's something that I swear was never part of the process. It was never part of any you just, the best docs kind of go on their own journeys. This started as a Johnny Burrell film. That was what I was asked to make, and then I found it way more interesting about how a band became so successful so quickly. They rose to the top and were headlining Reading by album 2, and then by the third one, it's all really like imploded, and that's fascinating. They're not the only band that have had that kind of crazy rise and fall, but this was a band that had, just cameoed on the Mighty Boosh and did all the magazines and were part of a scene that you couldn't not know Razorlight. And I think if anyone seen how they performed at Live 8, you'd be like, geez, they're well justified to be on like this lineup of icons, because they blew people off. They blew people away that day.
Yeah. And am I right in thinking, Andy, unless it's a myth, that Johnny actually blanked you down the street at one point, not long before the meeting in France?
Well, it was probably actually about 5 years before that. Because we spent 10 years apart, as it were, and I saw him midway through what do we call the decade before this one? The
Tens, is it? No.
Yeah, the tens. I saw him in the tens. Sorry, I saw him in the tens, and yeah, he didn't. I mean, it makes more sense to me now since we've been back together. It makes more sense to me that encounter, but at the time, it made no sense to me at all, because I hadn't seen him for about 6 years, and he did talk to me, but it was really odd. It was like it was like we didn't. It was like we didn't know each other, and it was very odd. And I left that meeting feeling, you can't. I think I said it before, kind of like I'd seen a ghost in a way, because I've thought about him a lot, obviously, and it was very, very bizarre. So yeah, so Ben coming along and sort of putting this together was really quite, it was really quite magical. And I have to say, testament to Ben, he wasn't angling for when I first met him, he wasn't angling for like a band reunion. He wasn't angling for anything other than just me and Johnny talking, which I always thought was really very cool of Ben. He was just like, look, I really think you two should talk. He talks about you a lot. You talk about him a lot. I'm sure there's a way to make this work. And yeah, I really, I think we owe an awful lot to Ben. I don't think this is just a film that he's made. I think he was instrumental in getting this band back together. I don't really sort of hear enough of that from us as a band, which is fair enough. Everybody's got their own take on it, but for me personally, Ben is a massive reason as to why we're back together, and I think it's brilliant because as the years go on, I've realised just how special it is. How unbelievably special it is to have it back in my life, even though it's not the easiest of bands. It's amazing to have it back in my life, and I think that Ben is. I owe that to Ben personally. That's how I feel.
Oh, Andy, thank you, mate. That's
Yeah.
makes it all well, because we've waited like 2 years to kind of get the film out there in like a wider release, and we had a brilliant night premiering it at Raindance Film Festival, and that was such an exciting time. And since then, I've had probably an email every other week, not exaggerating, a lot of them from France and lots of people all over the world, just kind of asking like, is this coming out? Like, where can I watch it? And I've just had to say, I think it's coming soon, but truthfully, because I was approached to make the film, I can't say it was like an original idea that I had. I was immediately buzzing to try and tell the story, or just at the very least make a really banging trailer with Johnny at the heart of it, and explore that. But I think so much of it was down to timing. We started filming in January 2020, so that was before the lockdown, the pandemic, and everyone's life going on pause. Might have been a really big reason why Johnny and Andy were more open-minded, while Carl was more open-minded as potentially reuniting with the band. So that was a huge, like, that was good fortune that it was that time for everybody. But it was honestly, for me, it was just heartbreaking hearing two dudes who were like, it was so positive, and then that was just one area of the life where I just kept thinking, you just guys have got to just talk it out. And then I think even if it doesn't go anywhere, I think you'll just respect each other again and be like, to be able to listen to each other and hug it out would be like the best case scenario. And I remember it was so on and off for a long time, like understandably, like Andy had loads going on and Johnny had loads going on, and there was no right way to do it. It was just a complete fluke that Andy at the time was on holiday in France, and Johnny was basing himself over in France at the same time. And it was just like, this is going to be a crazy adventure, but maybe I come down, we bring a couple of cameras and we just try and set it up. And like Andy's been so kind in saying what he said, but it was so hard, honestly, so hard I had to just basically persuade Andy and Johnny, you've got to trust me wholeheartedly here that I'm not gonna fuck you over. It'd be so easy and so like TV to remind Johnny of things that have been said, and remind Andy of things that have been said, to try and like get the sparks going on camera. And that is effectively, unfortunately, how a lot of reality telly is made. And they build up to this big moment of tension and it all explodes on screen. And that couldn't be further away from what I wanted. I just sort of thought, well, let's keep this setup as simple as possible. Even the producer, Robbie, who was with us, who, funnily enough, Johnny actually, Johnny thought that Robbie was Andy when he first got out of the car, because they both got this beautiful long blonde hair, and that's something I wanted to put into the edit, but it just didn't make sense in the end. I didn't have any fun Robbie to sort of justify it. But anyway, like the fact that I chose Robbie to do it because he's so emotionally intelligent, and I never asked him to like reverse the car into the drive, but we were so aware that this could actually go like horribly wrong for reasons well beyond our control, that like we actually just would have to quit getaway if it was too much, if it was just not cool. So but when we were sort of behind the cameras and it was just letting it happen, it was like it was mad to experience So I'll always be grateful that Andy trusted me like Johnny did. That I just said, I promise you, I would never walk you into something that could be awful, and just let it.
It's so weird now. It's so weird now thinking back to that weekend or whatever it was, or week or whatever. I was really nervous, and I was, even though I'd spent a bit of time with Ben. I never didn't trust him because, you can look at this beautiful man. How could you not trust him? But I was worried. I was really worried, and I was on holiday with my very good friend Dom, who plays drums in Muse, and I'm with him most. Well, I'm with him most of the time, I suppose. But I was with him that summer, and he actually came along with me because he's met Ben before, because I think Ben's done some work with Muse. And Dom came along with me to meet Ben up in the little village in France, because I think Dom was also a little bit suspicious of what was going on, and was kind of being a good mate and being a little bit like, I'm going to come with you for a little bit and see. Is that right, Ben? Is that he was there, wasn't
It's totally fair. He was honestly, he was like your
he? Yeah, he was. He came
protective
along.
best mate, and he was really trying. Kind of, I guess, if you're maybe, I'd sort of related to if you were dating someone and the kind of protective big brother would come
Yeah,
down,
yeah, yeah, and it was
just kind
quite.
of make sure that they're like decent.
Yeah, it was quite sweet, really, because so we both went up, and it became pretty apparent very, very quickly that, we were in a little team together here, and I knew that Ben was on both mine and Johnny's side, if you will. And I know it seems very dramatic to talk about it, especially, the funny thing about all of this is that with everything going on in the world right now, anything in rock and roll or entertainment seems kind of like, fairly sort of jovial and insignificant. But it was a big deal for me. It was a big deal for me, and it was a big deal for us. And I was really nervous about seeing Johnny again. I really was. And we were talking about reversing the car back out, weren't we? We were talking about, like,
Yeah, totally.
if this goes wrong, don't worry, you can jump straight back in the car and we'll zoom out of here. It was that kind of vibe.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
as I say, I know that sounds over the top, but that's where my head was at, and that's what it felt like on that day, for sure.
Yeah. And I think as well, the other element of it, which I've only sort of realized on reflection, is that because I wasn't there in like 2005, the closest I got to Razorlight was as a teenager listening to the tunes and going to see them play. That's as close as I ever got to any sort of interaction. I never got a photograph with the boys or anything like that. So all of the archive I was watching, all of the stories I was hearing from Roger, the manager, and Kumar, the tour manager, and people that were there, it was all. I'm just like this fascinated fan, effectively, of like what was going down and what was happening. And remember Kumar sort of presented like the dressing room layout at Reading when they headlined. It was, to me, it was just like, wow, this is just an amazing thing to sort of be learning about. And I think it probably would never have worked if I was a bit older and might have been around. I might have been a journalist or a photographer or and that if I was just around the band at that point, it'd probably be difficult for me to be like, it'd be impossible for me to be neutral. So I came at it just as I just wanted to be as fair as possible. I know that when we travelled over, Andy, like I know probably it was all a bit of a blur for you. I remember feeling really bad that I couldn't sort of say more. I remember at the time you were saying like, "Is what's Johnny's vibe like this morning?"
Yeah,
Say like, yeah, it was he was good. Like it was him. He was just he's jamming. He's got his mate there, and just sort of they're just hanging out.
yeah,
I It was really hard because really I wanted to say like honestly it's completely fine, and we were talking about Atletico Bilbao and just but I kept thinking that's not fair to Johnny then, because Johnny
yeah,
had asked me those questions and I can't say yeah, we had a long journey to get here, but we're staying in town and it's fine. And I was just trying to be as as fair as possible. And that's where, again, Robbie, the producer, kind of had to step in to just say, I promise you, Andy, like we were there, like it's we promise you we would never ever walk you into a bad situation. And if it was, I think I'd have happily have pulled the plug on
Yeah,
it happening, because it's just like I would never put two human beings into a really hostile, toxic world.
yeah, yeah,
And yeah, so, but it's all about trust.
yeah,
Effectively, Andy and Johnny were amazingly trusting that my heart was in the right place. Effectively, like there's no benefit in this going terribly wrong. It might do, and there's footage of it for you guys to have forever if you want it. But really, my heart was. I think them talking it out will be a really good thing for these two on a human level, and anything after that is a bonus.
Yeah, how did you feel about that moment being filmed, Andy? Like, quite an
um,
intense moment.
yeah. I mean, I felt really, really nervous about it, but I think that I knew that this was the only way it was going to happen. I knew that the only way that we were going to be able to do this was on camera, which just does seem a bit bizarre. It felt bizarre then, and it feels a bit odd now because I would have, there's a massive part of me that would have rather have sat down with Johnny on my own in a room absolutely without a camera. Um, but looking back, it makes sense, and that's why I always say that Ben had such an instrumental role. I think I guess in many ways, I guess there had to be a mediator, and that was the camera, and that was Ben, and so that was the only way it was gonna work, and that's cool, and also in many ways it's very special that it's there on camera. It's pretty awkward. I don't like watching it really, and that's no disrespect to Ben at all. That's just much more a reflection of how I feel about myself on that day. Um, I feel it. I guess I feel slightly sort of embarrassed about how anxious I was, um, but it's very honest. It's very very. It couldn't be any more honest. It couldn't be any more real of a reunion. But Ben had a camera in my face and in Johnny's face, and that was the first time we saw each other. And that's two human beings nervously saying hello to each other after a decade apart, after an incredibly intense 5 or 6 years together. And it is odd, if a band blows up. I know people can be funny about Razorlight. Perhaps it's a bit Marmite, um, but essentially, we had 5 or 6 years of being really, really very big as a band, and whether you liked us or whether you didn't like us, we were sort of everywhere for a long time, and to be everywhere for a long time entails doing a lot of work, being together all the time, literally all the time, being on tour all the time. And so it was very odd to go from being, on that kind of a schedule with each other to then just not seeing each other for 10 years. So this was a very, very um, special reunion. But I was really nervous about it. I'm never going to lie. It was really nerve-wracking to getting in that car and driving out to that farm to go and meet Johnny, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know what I've just remembered as well? I don't think the cameras were ever supposed to be part of it. I think it got to a point where I think I'd sort of offered and said, look, if you wanted to use me as a way for you guys to meet up and chat, do it.
Yeah,
And then I figured that if it was recorded, because they're both really nice guys, they're going to listen to each other, even if they don't agree. I think I was just like, where that time that Andy, that you bumped into Johnny, and it would have probably been a really strange experience for both of you, and you've probably always thought about what it could be like when that moment happens and stuff, and you probably would both look back on it being like, oh yeah, for me it was odd, and it was odd for me as well, but that it's almost like you kind of remembering what you can remember, And I thought if there were cameras just on tripods, keep it as simple as possible. I just feel like Johnny has to listen, otherwise he's not going to come across well, and Andy will have to listen back. And then it's like I was just like, forget. I remember saying like, don't worry about the film, and we're working together ultimately. It's the way I've always made documentaries. I want the people at the heart of it in the story to feel proud of it, that they would share it with their friends and loved ones, families at the end of the film. And I said like, if we have this footage, then there is a record of it that you guys can always reflect on. And because you've experienced so much together, who knows how it will go down? But trust me, I think also that I think that probably people that knew Andy and Johnny were maybe willing it to go well. And I think if it was walking into something that was really unpleasant, I never even would have suggested it. And I would have been just really grateful that Andy would have contributed to the story as someone that like would have been an amazing person to have input and to, you know, kind enough to share his experiences. But it's just the way it happened. You know what I mean? Like the fact that my brother, who was one of the camera operators, he's literally just sat in a white chair, like in the moment where the two guys have come together and they can't really hug it out because of, you know, we're still in the pandemic at that point. And he's just there with the camera like awkwardly behind him. To me, like I know it's probably to most like directors and filmmakers would be like, that's a nightmare, like we have to do it again. But it just shows it was like it could not have been more real. Like it always makes me smile being like
Yeah,
a nightmare that he's in the middle of that shot for him and for me. But it's just like it's no bullshit. Like we really have done this for real.
it's so true, and it's so good what you say. I totally forgot. Obviously, you were there with your brother. It was really interesting that we weren't able to hug, because I think in many ways Johnny was probably quite happy about that, because I'm a big hugger and I like to try and fix everything with like that kind of behavior, you know, with like a hug and a, you know, something a bit emotional. And I think it was quite interesting that that wasn't allowed. So it put me, do you know what I mean? Like I wasn't able to use that, uh, you know, very familiar tool, as it were, of mine, you know? So everybody was, you know, whether it was Ben or his brother or any of the crew that were there or me and Johnny, I totally forgot that it was, I totally forgot that it was full COVID. We weren't in masks, were we? But it was like we weren't allowed to hug, and we, you know, it
Right.
was. I mean, it couldn't have been my. Really, I mean, really, it couldn't have been
Yeah, the
any more
precaution
awkward. Any more awkward.
yeah, I won't bore you with like the risk assessments and how hard it was to get down to France to make it happen. Also, like without revealing like where Andy was on holiday and where Johnny like hangs out and stuff, it was basically getting from one side of France to the other.
Yeah.
It was almost a documentary in is it possible to get Andy from one side of the country to the other without him be like, nah, actually I've changed my mind. I'm not up for this anymore. It was such a massive I think it was like we had to change planes twice
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
on the road. Don was really kind, like he was thinking it can't take that long to get from A to B, and he was like looking at different routes and
Yeah, 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 yeah.
the road. He was like, it can't take 17 hours to get there. And yeah, Robbie's a very good producer, and that was the fastest route we could get from A to B to C was what we
Fully
did.
masked up on several flights.
And we get off the plane and I'd be like, oh no, where's Andy? And we'd actually spend a bit of time just trying to reunite, being like, okay, maybe this is the point where
He's
he's
done a runner.
gone home to his lovely girls,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, and to me, I'd be like, well, I wouldn't have blamed him because it was all that to me, like that was all part of the adventure of doing it. There was so much unknown right up until, um, you know, and you know what you see is basically what happened. It was basically no edits, and it is awkward at times, and like I think Andy's the Andy I know is represented like perfectly in that scene because he just immediately goes to the heart and he just doesn't he just speaks from the heart, and it's just like it's I know from the people that came to the premiere at Rain Dance is that that's what they all reference. They all reference like I wasn't expecting to get like choked up, because Andy just had obviously built this up in his heart for a while of like, if I do see Johnny in the right circumstances, what do I want to say? And he just immediately went to family and his, you know, the career and the creativity that he's gone on, and that was what he wanted to say to Johnny first. It wasn't, hey, like, what the hell, what's happened the last 10 years? His whole angle was, thank you. Like, you know, if this doesn't go any further, like, I owe you a lot because of what we experienced together. And I think that set the kind of the wheels in motion for like a really lovely, authentic conversation to had.
Yeah. And how did it work in terms of logistics with the cameras? Did you have one with Andy and one with Johnny? Or because it seemed
Yeah,
to
so
work
that's
that
part of
way.
the reason that I took my brother with me, not only that because we've gone to so many gigs together and we're sort of built in the same way of, you know, pride ourselves on being like lovely people first, but I left Jack with Johnny, and then I was with Andy, just so we could just kind of and just leave the cameras rolling. There's no clapperboard or action. You know, I'm sure to like most Hollywood directors just be like, you can't be professional and set it up like that. But it was, to me, like that's how it had to be. And if there was this big boom over the top, even that would have just felt, you know, this really kind of intense situation would have felt way worse on both sides. So we just tried, you know, I had Andy that was mic'd up in the car, and Jack had mic'd up Johnny. And when we arrived, we were just rolling on the cameras, and it happened.
Yeah. And I've got to ask you why. Obviously, it links in with the podcast world because you used an episode I did with Conor McNicholas. You used him as the narration to open the film. Like, why did that like strike you as something good to use?
Yeah, I think it's because obviously Connor's gig at the NME was so, he was at like the peak of the indie scene. He would have just considered and listened to every band that was going, and he had such a strong view on Razorlight, and especially this gig on the rooftop in Shoreditch that he had such vivid memories of, and that was archived that I was able to use and access, and that was like amazing to see, you know, fans on cars and a street completely full. And I think how Connor described Razorlight was, I think, how most people that are into music would put it together. And it was such a strong answer that he gave that it was like that just sets up the film. I think there and then. And one thing that I never used, and I did flirt with the idea of putting it in there, is he talked about he was quite negative about Johnny, or the Johnny, the reputation that he had. But you followed up Harry and asked, did you ever meet him or hang out with him? And he said no. And I kept thinking, that's interesting, because I probably went into filming with Johnny for the first time with that apprehension based on reputation and all the, you know, magical quotes that he's been attributed to over the years. And then actually spending 10 minutes with him, he was like just a genuinely brilliant person to be around. And he does have this aura that I think Andy would know far better than me, but he's got it, and he's completely and utterly secure in his own personality, and that's a really enjoyable thing to be around. So Connor had sort of hinted that there's this really big reputation there. But as you rightly followed up and said, did you have any interactions with him? And he said, no, I didn't want to get involved in that. So his reputation preceded Johnny. So that felt like a good way to kick off the film.
Yeah, fair play. But I mean, fair to say there was difficulties working with each other, Andy. Like how obviously nuanced relationship, like most bands. Do you think it was any worse though?
Sorry, say that again. Do you think what any worse?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, like Ben praising Johnny there, but obviously it was a nuanced relationship. Let's say, do you think it was any worse than other bands, or do you think it was like par for the course?
Um, I think that Johnny is. I would honestly describe him as in every sense of the words, the real deal. I don't. I think the thing I would he lives and breathes it. He is. I've never met anybody like him. And if he is hard work, it's only because he's completely and utterly sort of, you know, sort of married to the job, as it were, married to the duty of being he's a proper rock star. There aren't many of them anymore. And you know, I think if I found him difficult, or if he is difficult, it's because he's just it's what he does. For instance, like I've played the drums in bands all my life, like since, like, I don't know, age 11. I haven't really ever done anything else, so I've lived and breathed it myself. But it's different. I also, you know, like I have you know, a family, and I think I always thought I probably would. I always hoped I would, and I saw them as being able to exist. Whereas Johnny, I'm not saying that Johnny wouldn't have a family. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying he is all about writing music and performing, and that's literally that's. I mean, he does lots of other things. Don't get me wrong. He's an athletic. You know, I mean, to be honest with you, he's probably on the tennis court more than he is on the on stage, but he's just totally immersed to the point where it makes me feel like I'm not immersed enough. And I always thought I was pretty obsessive when it came to making music. So that's what I mean when I say I've never met anyone like him. He makes me feel like I don't make enough music. You know, he's just at it all the time. You know what I mean? It's quite incredible. So he's quite, you know, he's quite intense. But I mean, I'm intense. You know, we probably clashed because we were both dedicated to trying to make our band the greatest band ever, and sometimes that really works, and bands go on to, you know, to just do years and years and years and years of the same thing, and sometimes it means that you clash a little bit, and so I don't know if it was more weird or difficult than other people's. I know that it was certainly very dramatic, but I think that we both had a part to play in that, for sure. You know, I think that it's all very well that I'm always known as like a nice bloke, and Connor has said some very nice things about me, and I know that, you know, I always feel a bit uneasy when people talk about me being a nice bloke, because it ends up making it sound like Johnny isn't a nice bloke, and I think it's not as straightforward as that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. And then when it comes to writing songs together, there's obviously a few stories about that in terms of songwriting credits and stuff with America, was it? Was there a
But
story
no,
there?
not really though. Not really. Like, it was never really that complicated. You know, it's a song that we wrote together, and the credits are that we wrote it together. I think it's just always more just that it's surprising when the drummer of a band. I mean, like, no one really knows that Danny Goffey wrote All Right. You know, it's not like I don't think it's a weird thing of our band. I think it's just that people, I think because Johnny was such a, you know, at the end of the day, Johnny was a bit of a megastar at that time. And I think people quite liked bigging up the fact that the drummer had had a lot to do with the biggest hit. And it ended up being a kind of an inaccurate story, really, because at the end of the day, it's a song that he and I wrote together, and that's how it's credited. So it's never really been an issue. The only reason we ever had a thing, there was some stuff back in the day when people used to read The Sun and The Mirror. We had a bit of a bust up because we'd been in the pub, and I think I'd said something to him about how he didn't want it to be a song for our band for a little while. But, you know, this is just into band shit. You know what I mean? This is just like, it wasn't really relevant. I think we were like, momentarily, maybe for 5 minutes, we were sort of tabloid fodder. We were worthy of being talked about in the papers, and it was a story that just you know, took off a little bit. But at the end of the day, I've never had any problem with the credits or anything of America. It's a song that he and I wrote, and that's how it's credited, and that's how we've you know, we both you know, we've both made a little bit of money out of it over the years, and I'm very grateful. And do you know what I mean? There's no, that is certainly something that where there is zero beef, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. And as Ben mentioned at one point, it mentions in the film about having separate dressing rooms at Reading. Is that like another thing that's blown out of proportion? Is it just become necessity when you're a big band?
No, I don't think that was blown out of proportion. I think it's fact. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, we haven't. None of us. Well, I haven't been around Reading Festival in the headlining arena for a few years, obviously now. But I do believe that our backstage area was record breaking.
Yeah, that's
I think
that's-
that was true.
But
yeah.
why did that happen though?
uh,
'Cause you hear about other, but I think Libertines did it when they reformed and stuff. But I don't know.
did they? I don't know. Yeah, but they. I don't know. I mean, we were at that point. We were pretty big, and we weren't talking to each other that much. And we all turned up separately, and we had an insanely huge backstage area that was all. I don't know. I did hear from some people that it was unusual,
Okay.
or record breaking.
So Kumar,
Let's talk to Roy Castle.
Kumar, who features in the film, like he very kindly, like as you know, tour managers in the music world, I've got an amazing archive and attention to detail on everything, and that includes like he had a, I think it was like drawn on. I don't think it was like what's it called, Microsoft Paint. It wasn't Paint, but like it was definitely like it was so perfect in its design. It felt like it could only have been like 2007 that you'd have created something like it. And he sort of explained it was like massive in terms of the space it was taking up and how much you know the rider list was huge for everything. And Kumar explained that Foo Fighters, I think, were playing later on in the weekend, and Dave Grohl had come down on the Friday night to check out the backstage. He'd like said they'd never seen a backstage area more impressive than Razorlights, and that then became the norm. So basically, Razorlight were pioneering in that, you know, all the bands that have played at the top of Reading ever since 2007 really have Razorlight to thank for such
Yeah, we were doing. We were.
digs.
Yeah, we were doing something really good. We were really helping bands for the future to have just the best space they could ever have before they go on stage. You know, that's all we were doing. We're just a really helpful, compassionate, forward-thinking bunch of guys.
Excellent spin. But
Not
yes,
a
well,
spin. There's no spinning going on.
but with the film as well, it's like an underlying theme of mental health. Like when you and Johnny, like with the meet, you talk about, you know, the reason you left, and you found it easier to say that you had a booze problem rather than actually, I don't know, really go into reasons why you left. Did you feel like it was different times, like you couldn't really go into depth about that at the time?
Uh, yeah, I mean, look, you know, in all honesty, that you know, that element of the film. I mean, Ben knows this because we've talked about it a lot. That element of it, it doesn't sit massively comfortably with me. Um, that isn't why I left the band. I didn't leave the band because of a drinking problem. And you know, during our time, you know, in the noughties as a band, I don't think my drinking was any more of a thing than you know, one or two others in the band's drinking. I don't think it was. We never talked about it at the time. You know, I think when you're in a band and you're in your 20s, you tend to do a lot of drink and drugs. I never did any drugs, and I do like drinking, and I certainly liked drinking back then. So that's definitely something for me that's the one bit of this film that I'm not, you know, if I'm being massively honest, I'm not hugely comfortable with. But I had to accept, and I still do accept that that's something that Johnny feels strongly about, and especially when it comes to me. And I really wanted, and still want very much for this band to be a thing, and for us to be close, and for us, to succeed and move forward. And so I think we've found some sort of middle ground where, I accept that, that's the way he feels about me, and I don't agree. But I think on our better days, we kind of meet in the middle somewhere. Yeah, it's a difficult one. Obviously it's a difficult. It's tricky for me to kind of like sum that up in a concise, sort of sexy answer. I don't know. I don't know if I've made any sense in my response at all, really.
Mate. Kumar said exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's in the film, that Kumar would have been at more gigs and would have been on more tours than Roger, for example, who's managed Razorlight from the beginning and still does. And Kumar wanted to make the point that the drinking was excessive across the whole band. And he had the rider for every member of the band and said they were having the best time. We all were having the best time. So I completely get the sensitivities around it. And I think that I couldn't ignore what like Johnny attributed to why Andy might have wanted to move on. But for me, like that was such an important part of the conversation, because that's probably the one thing that Andy, you wanted to bring up and say, actually, the reason that I wanted to move on was because I couldn't deal with how intense this, being in a band and playing music is supposed to be fun, right? That's probably the reason that anyone would get into playing in a band, especially that in these times. So that's probably the one thing that I thought I owed it to Andy that he actually could challenge Johnny back, and that was the only part probably in the whole conversation that was actually quite tense. But I think, to be fair to someone like Kumar wanted to say that was the scene. We were all having the best time, and why wouldn't you if you're playing the world and you're having a great time? That's all wrapped up in band culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, how you mentioned like when you left the band and you had friends and family asking you questions like, "Why on earth are you doing it?" So how hard was that when you got people like questioning your decisions and stuff?
It was really, really hard, to be honest with you. It was a really lonely decision. And when I look back, I think it was even more of a scary decision that I made. I was very lucky. I've got a very supportive wife, and she was with me all the way. And friends of mine understood what I was talking about. But that said, there were a lot of friends and certain members of my family that didn't understand what I was doing and felt like I was doing something very stupid. And also, to be fair to them, in many ways I was doing something quite stupid, because we were a band at the top of our game, and I decided to leave. And it's not possibly the most sensible decision you might make, especially as a fairly young man, maybe not understanding the world and what I need to do to be a I don't know, to realizing that you're onto a good thing and realizing that you've got security in some ways. It's not really the kind of thing you think about when you're in a band. You know what I mean? I suppose that's what it is. I wasn't really thinking about pensions and security when I was 28 and we were on our third album. I was more thinking about it, what an amazing thing we'd carved out for ourselves, and that I wanted to enjoy myself, and I wanted to go off and make music in other areas and stuff. So it was much more complicated than any of that, but it was really difficult. There was a lot of, you can imagine, like in with your mates, you go down the pub and chat with your mates or whatever. People have got views. We all know about views, and they can be very strong. And leaving Razorlight in my tiny little corner of the world, there were a lot of strong views that made me feel like I'd really made a bad decision. And it was a very difficult time, and I definitely felt pretty lonely. And it was a really odd it was a really odd time. Yeah, I mean, that's probably about the best way I could sum it up, I think.
Yeah, I mean, how would you navigate that? Like you say, just got good support around you with your wife and stuff, type thing, in terms of mental health.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know, and some lovely friends, and you know, obviously, I'm very close with a lot of people in bands. I've already talked about Dom. I need to not go on about him too much, but he is a very special bloke. We must celebrate Dom. But you know, he was very supportive. I had some really good friends around me that know the business, that know what it's like to be in a band, and people that understood. But there were more people, I suppose, that just couldn't compute why you would leave something that was your dream, you know.
Yeah,
So yeah, so it was really, I mean, it was, you know, I say difficult. There are proper difficulties in this life, and leaving a band that are successful is not one of them. But as I say, where I was at that time, it was a difficult decision for sure.
yeah. And got to mention Ricky Gervais, who may or may not appear in the film. Um, but how would you end up working with him? Because I came to see you at Hammersmith actually when you played in that band. But how does that relationship start, kind of thing?
Well, I met him. The first time I met him was when we were performing. We were performing Wire to Wire of our third album on the Jonathan Ross show, and he was a guest on there promoting, you know, something extras or something, I think. And we were. I mean, obviously, we're all huge fans of Ricky Gervais, so I was very excited that I was sat next to Ricky Gervais, and we got chatting a little bit. We got on really well. He drew a massive he drew a massive knob on my arm. And I had my daughter with me at the time. She was probably about 6 months old, but he drew this massive knob. And then I went on and we played, and I had the big knob on my arm, and we just got on really well. And then I didn't see him for about 4 years, and then I bumped into him in literally in the street. We don't live that far apart from each other in London, and I bumped into him in the street, and he said that a couple of people had told him that I'd be somebody that would be good to put a band together around the David Brent character. And obviously, I was over the moon. I was over the moon, and so I did that. But that genuinely was, we bumped into each other in the street, and because obviously, you know, there's this slight sort of, I call it the rock nod, you know, when you don't really know each other, but you do know each other because you're both, you know. So we both gave each other the rock nod, and we got along well. And then we started talking a lot on the phone, and we ended up just jamming a lot and playing a lot together. And he, you know, we just really hit it off. And I have to say, the most amazing thing about Ricky is that I've now been working with him for about 10 years, and I'm working with him on a new project right now. And he's just been incredibly loyal and wonderful to me. I really do feel like that is that, you know, that's an utter dream. But again, I said this to Ben when we were making the Razorlight thing. As much as it's like that down to me, a lot of that, and me being like a nice bloke and a good bloke and all this bollocks, I owe so much of it to Razorlight, you know, because that whole thing I'm talking about, the rock nod, you know, when you know someone but you don't know someone, that Razorlight was my ticket to that. You know, I wouldn't have been able to walk down the street and bump into Ricky Gervais and have a nice chat with him unless I had been in Razorlight. Do you know what I mean? So I will always feel indebted to Johnny and the band and what we've achieved together, because although I think I have gone on and done good things with it, I would never have had the opportunity to do that had we not been a band, and you know, had I not enjoyed the success we had because of the things we did together. And so I will always say that I owe a hell of a lot to Johnny and the band.
Yeah. I'd love to think Gervais sent that clip unprompted in the film, but
Well, is he in the film? Is he? I can't remember. Is he in the film?
oh, I don't. It's a bit of a spoiler in it 'cause it's quite a little hidden
Well, yeah.
bit. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, we
I
won't
think
say
it
it.
was well, without giving it away, it was a private message that he'd sent to you
Oh, is that in the film?
to make it just to make you laugh.
Yeah.
Because it's so brilliant. So
In the bath.
yeah.
Is that in the film?
Yeah. He had
Ah.
to, well, he had to, as with everything that's in the film.
We had to clear it.
get signed off and cleared. The hardest thing to get signed off was the photo session with Mick Rock.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he's a
Basically,
character in here.
which was my bad. You have this huge that you have like big spreadsheets of like, okay, like Razorlight own this, and Roger the manager's giving me this footage, and you sort of it's amazing. You've got this treasure chest of stuff to kind of start telling the story with, and always in my mind had put this like photo shoot with Mick Rock was a kind of Razorlight videographer back in the day and stuff, and just as we were coming like on the home straight of clearing it, I was like, oh no, it's not. It's just one of these amazing videos I've seen on YouTube. And then you have to go down the road of needing to speak with Mick Rock's estate and persuade them that this is something that we would really love to put into the film. And Andy would have more experience of estates, I'm sure.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
But the estates kind of exist for one reason and one reason only, which is to keep the moolah rolling in. So you just basically have to kind of I found I had to be totally just honest and say, look, this is an amazing photo shoot that the band had, and what he said was brilliant and quite, I imagine he's probably never had a photo shoot quite like what you had with Mick Rock in terms of.
I mean, yeah, that was terrifying. Yeah. I mean,
one of those things.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Fucking hell. I was in at the deep end.
It's spectacular. But I'd say one thing, Andy, but the thing that I love about you, and that so many of your friends and people that spend any time with you love about you, is like how warm you are, and you're extremely humble. But I know from having been fortunate to work with lots of other bands, is people think you are a fucking beast when you sit on a drum kit and you play. And there's plenty of other bands that when you were between We Are Scientists and your solo projects and doing the soundtracks, where people really they didn't want to audition or who could fit into this band. They were like, could we get Andy Burrows to play for us?
So, that's very sweet.
I mean, like it's really cool that you would say that, but you also, not to kind of quote what Johnny said, is that like you got into that band through what was an NME advertised audition process, and then you wrote songs together. You've had this amazing career since, and people love you because you're you. It's not that you just right place, right time. Maybe a nod now and again. With the
odd rock nod. Ben, you're a lovely man, and you know the respect is mutual. I think I think I owe you a lot, because I'm very grateful to have this band back in my life, even though it may not always be the most plain sailing of outfits. It means everything to me, and I think that you have played a massive part in all of this. So I think as much as you can say nice things about me, I must say all these nice things about you, my man.
Thank you, buddy.
Well, that's a nice segue, because I want to ask, obviously you've carried on the band since the film and the reunion. How does it compare to back in the day type thing? What's it like day to day in Razorlight now?
Well, I mean, obviously it's slightly less frantic, because obviously, as I say, those I mean, I guess it must have been 5 or 6 years between 2004 and 2009, where it was just absolutely crazy all the time. We were just everywhere all the time, just continuously go around the world. And, because it was going well, everybody wanted a bit of it all the time. Do you know what I mean? So it was utterly crazy. So I suppose that's different now. We're still playing big shows, and that's great. And we're very lucky that we could still do that. And we are still making music together. And sometimes it can get quite hectic. And but yeah, I think the major difference is probably, just not being, a band in their 20s that everybody wants a little bit of. That's the main difference. I think everything else feels much the same. Like when we're on. I have to say the most interesting thing has been that is playing live. That feels that there's literally no difference. That's the bit that is interesting. The four of us on stage genuinely feels like home, feels like musical home. If I was to close my eyes and be halfway through one of those shows, it could be 2005, it could be 2025. You know what I mean? There's literally no difference. Maybe my back hurts a bit more. But yeah, I think probably the main difference is purely just that back then it was every single day, all the time, you know, constant travel, constant being away. Now it's like a medium version. You never know. You know, there's every I don't know. I mean, it's never going to be like that again, is it? I mean, even if we were to even if we were to have some sort of crazy sync in a movie and be big again, you know, we're not going to be in our mid-20s again. And yeah, I don't know. It's a different time, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, but
I'm sure the others would answer differently. I don't know. That for me, that's the major difference.
I
are you
came
able
back
to
to
enjoy it
Brighton.
more, really, do you think?
I'm able to enjoy a lot of aspects of it more. I'm certainly able to. I mean, I always felt very grateful because obviously, like many people, I spent a lot of years, like 10 years probably, from when I was a young teenager, dreaming that something like that might happen. And so I always felt fairly grateful when it did happen. But I do feel now a sort of you know, like a new sense of gratitude, because it's quite amazing to be like, for instance, like, you know, like my daughters, you know, one of my daughters is 16 and the other one's 8 or whatever. But well, I don't mean to say whatever. She's just as important. But what's amazing is like them, you know, I've seen a lot of, you know, blokes in bands talk about this. You know, it's quite amazing when your kids come of a certain age and they're like, all of a sudden it's quite interesting to them. Where I've spent all these years with them not being interested at all. And so it's quite amazing for me. That's why I think I feel this new sense of gratitude, because it's just like, wow, it's amazing that we still get to do this. It's amazing that it's you know, a real thing that people remember and people dig the songs, and that we can still do all this, and we can still go in the studio and we can still make new music. I feel very lucky, to be honest with you. I think that's my overriding feeling on all of it, is that you know, how lucky, how daft it all is, and how brilliant that, you know, I spent my childhood watching Top of the Pops, and I've spent my adult years playing the drums and going around the world, and that's my job, and it's utterly, you know, stupid, really. But it's my reality, and it's kind of, you know, so I feel very grateful for it. You know, very grateful.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning, Ben, you got the access to the reunion between Johnny and Andy, but you also got access to the first rehearsal back. Was that quite a cool experience for you?
Yeah, massively, especially because I think the tension become quite high again at that point. Like I hadn't met Carl in person until that day. We'd had similar conversations like this over Zoom and got to know each other as best that we could. But it was, you know, brilliant that Carl was rejoining and was going to be part of this like rehearsal. And I remember that Andy, you guys were playing Los Angeles Waltz,
Mm.
just sort of like just getting back into a groove together. And again, like you can't, you know, you couldn't script these things, and audiences are really clever. I think that they know when it's bullshit and they know when it's faked. And you guys were playing, and that's part of the reason that I put GoPros and had a few cameras that were kind of just rolling in case any of this stuff happened. That Johnny sort of walked in and he's coated up and sunglasses and everything like that, and you can sort of see his like childlike glee that the three, you know, the three musicians that have had the biggest significant like impacts that he's played with are like together in a room and playing, and Johnny walks over, like takes his coat off, kind of just watches in awe and carries on. There's no chat, and did you get your flight over all right, Carl? Or there's none of that. Literally just they just played straight away. So I think that was like probably like the biggest goosebump moment for me personally. Like to be there in the room, like was like the biggest privilege ever. And that song in particular has like a completely different meaning. If I wanted to feel something instantly through a song, that would be one of the first ones I'd go to, because it was just so special to see the guys playing, and they obviously went on and played all sorts of tunes. But that first time that actually the four of them were in the room playing just happened. There was no conversation. Johnny put on his guitar and carried on halfway through the song.
Yeah, and that's amazing that you say that as well. Also, because that song, which finishes that second album, has always been a favourite of ours to play. Certainly, me and Carl. It's always been a favourite of ours to play. But I went down, me and Johnny, back in the day, back in like 2005, just as the Arctic Monkeys were blowing up, actually. Because I remember we were driving. Me and Johnny drove down to Dartmouth to go, and we rented a house to go and try and write some songs. And I remember we drove through Bristol and Arctic Monkeys were playing, and Johnny was like quite keen to go and see them because they were like the new sort of hot competition. But I remember that trip, we went down there and we wrote, or maybe he had quite a lot of Los Angeles waltz, I don't know, but we wrote the middle bit, and it sings, it goes, I think of you and we own each other. I think of you and we own each other. And I always think that me and him on that little trip, we wrote that middle eight. And every time we play it, it's weird. And it's weird it's the first song that we played back together again because it's got that line, we own each other. And that always strikes me as quite. I don't think Johnny would agree. I'm sure he's got a whole other. I'm sure he probably doesn't even remember that that's what happened. But for me, that song, not only was it the first one we played when we got back together, but that little line in the middle is always quite poignant for me because it's got that line, we own each other. And it's quite sort of like interbandly intense, appropriately interbandly intense.
Yeah.
And what's it like now in terms of songwriting? Have you always got like new songs on the go type thing?
I mean, Johnny's writing all the time. We're still writing together. Probably fair to say that I've backed off a little bit, but not out of any lack of enthusiasm. I think it's just I'm quite conscious of making sure he feels like he's got his space. I think I'm always a little bit paranoid about that second album because it really blew up and it had quite a lot of my vibe on it. And I think I always feel a bit paranoid because Up All Night was like the cool debut album, and he was like, you know, a cool young rock star. And then our second album was like the kind of like big sort of police effort that blew up. And I always feel a bit like maybe I came in a bit heavy-handed. Not that I meant to, but so I'm always a bit conscious of not wanting to get too involved, and I think maybe sometimes that comes across like I'm not enthusiastic. So I don't know. I'm trying to find a sort of a balance now. We still write together a lot, but yeah, I'm certainly really enjoying just playing the drums and being the drummer in Razorlight, which is what which was a dream, which was a real. Which was one hell of a coup. I can't believe it happened, back then. Still excites me now when I think about it. I mean, what a dream band to have joined. It's still one of my favorite bands ever. I love Razorlight. I won't hear anyone talk shit about Razorlight ever.
No, fair play, mate. Yeah. I mean, it's worth mentioning that second album did go to number one, so.
Yeah, they did sell a few million copies as well.
Yeah.
All right, well, cheers for your time, both of you. I just want to finish on question each or a couple of questions each. Like, Ben, what was the high point of making the film, and is there anything you do differently about it?
Good question. I reckon it has to be what happened in France, especially because of kind of where that scene went, because it really was just supposed to be a conversation. And that's the beauty of having a really simple setup, is that if Johnny's like, oh, look, I'll come and show you my drum kit. And we would just go, it was just happening in front of us. And then I suppose, no, I think looking back, I wouldn't change anything other than I probably would have loved to have done more about the kind of early years and the formation of the band. I know that the Swedish boys, Bjorn and Carl, they would have loved there to be more about Up All Night and those early years. But the truth is, you kind of have to work with the archive that you got available. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, that you kind of go with the flow as the story unfolds. But what was really apparent, that it was a story about friendship and forgiveness. And as soon as you start focusing down on that and be like, actually, that's the heart of what this film's all about. That would be like a kind of fans version. Director's cut. I could have happily got lost in sort of diving into, you know, deeper aspects, but actually how this band imploded, really, it felt like it was that Johnny and Andy had this magical thing together and made great songs together. They played brilliantly together, and then suddenly no chat, no connection whatsoever, and that to me was the most interesting part of it. So no regrets, only other than, you know, we'd love to have released the film, you know, a few weeks after we premiered it, but this is just, that's the way the cookie crumbles, and better late than never.
Yeah, I mean, I did ask you before we started recording, but what can you tell us about why it was delayed?
Because ultimately I was approached to make the film, and when you begin a project, you often have to sign a big juicy contract that says, actually, we own this thing. So what that means in the end, sadly, is that you can bang the drum, if you excuse the pun, and you can try and shape it as best you can, but it wasn't my baby. So the control and where it was released, how it was released, that was, yeah, all I could do was I could have a say and have an input, but no, that was decisions far higher up the building in Universal. But look, they provided a lot of the archive, and it was collaborative in some sense. But yeah, the truth is, like, I go into making docs because of I wanted to be rich in experiences. So that's the way I see this project, and I've made real friends out of what happened, and I love Andy, and I love Johnny, and Carl and Björn, and Roger and Kumar, all, you know, Rennie in the band, everyone that kind of contributed to it. Like, to me, it's, if I were to, hopefully this wouldn't happen, lose contact with Andy, and we pass each other in the street, and we had each other the rock nod, like that kind of rock nod is kind of, would mean more than any sort of piece of paper that might come through the post, you know, once a year.
We've always got the rock nod, brother.
Exactly. If you haven't got the rock nod, I would argue, what have you got?
Yeah. What have you got? If you've not got the rock nod, what the hell have you got?
But yeah, but it's cool that it's finally being released, and yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, and then Andy, similarly, like what's the high point of those early days, if there is one that stands out? I mean, obviously quite a lot. And then is there anything you do differently as well?
No, I don't think so. I think I mean, High Point, the whole thing was nuts. I mean, you know, for anybody that would ever be interested in sitting and listening to me prattle on about my high points, there's plenty of them. So maybe I'll hold a little, maybe I'll hold an evening of high points at someday.
Yeah, I'll host it if you want, mate.
Yeah, sure. We'll do an evening of Andy Burrows high points. No, I mean, the whole thing was amazing. As I said earlier on, I feel so grateful. I really do. I'm not just saying that. I do. When I look back, it just seems nuts, and I still feel like it's nuts that we're doing everything we're doing now. You know, it's weird. My daughter just bought tickets for Reading Festival. Sometimes it always did blow my mind that we headlined it, and it does also now. But I don't know about highlights. The whole thing was magical. The whole thing was completely and utterly amazing. And when I think about it now, it feels like another world. It feels completely dreamlike. It was too bonkers to quantify. You know, which is why something like this film is great, because you get to see a little bit of it and realize that it was real. It wasn't all a dream. I think Ben has done an incredible job with this film. I think it's a shame in some ways that I think it only tells, you know, 40-50% of the story. That's not Ben's fault, by the way. Because, you know, it was chaos. But you do get to see quite a bit of that in this, and how amazing it is that some of it is there to be seen by anyone that might have a modicum of interest. But no, I wouldn't change anything. The whole thing's been a very welcome whirlwind.
Yes, good finishing point. And I mean, obviously the plugs on where to watch it, Ben. Where do people go to see it?
Amazon, Google Play, and iTunes. I didn't realize that iTunes was still a thing, but it feels nostalgic.
Is that
You
on
know
Apple
what?
TV or whatever? No.
Malta have got a very strong case, right, Ben?
Yeah, I got sent a list through of where it's been released in the world, and there's definitely places I'd love to stamp on my passport one day. Yeah, it's pretty much everywhere, I
You
think.
can definitely watch it in Malta.
Malta's in caps, basically.
Yeah,
So
Malta's in caps.
what we learned from this experience, if nothing else, is that the indie rock scene in Malta remains as hardcore as it was 20 years ago. You can't get enough of Rip It Up.
Yeah.
It's mad Muller, isn't it? They've got like British road signs and stuff. Have you been?
Well, maybe that's why. Yeah. Maybe that's why.
Anyway, it's not a great finishing point, but
It's great. It's fantastic. And also your background is quite something.
cheers, mate. Yeah, someone complained that I'm usually in my bedroom. Someone's like, it's rude to your guests if you're just in your bedroom. So
Yeah.
I've put...
Well, that's great. It looks great.
cheers, man. Nice one.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, nice one. Cheers for getting me involved, Ben, as well. Well, getting the pod involved with the film.
No, man,
Great.
I'm a big fan and listener. My good friend Graham got me onto years ago and said this is like a fantasy listening podcast experience for anyone that went up going to gigs at like the Sugar Mill in Stoke and Wolfram Hall in Wolverhampton and moshing about to I went to see the Rakes. So as soon as I recognised 22 Grand Pod, I was like, yeah, I'm in.
Oh, thank God. Do people listen to this more than they do watch it? No. You've got to say no.
Well, it's about 50-50, I think.
In Malta.
No.
In Malta. Anyway, big up Malta. Big up the podcast.
He tempted to make a documentary about this whole scene, Ben. Sorry, quickly, out of interest.
Yeah, I'm definitely tempted. I know that even during the making of this Razorlight film, that Johnny was getting asked all the time, I think, to contribute to the Camden series that
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leaper was involved with, and like that was brilliantly made, but I think there'd be like some reticence. But if there's no person I know as popular as Andy, if he wanted to bring people together, share stories, and maybe one day it'd be fun to do something like that. But yeah,
I'm your man.
yeah, I worked around Camden for a long time, so I feel like that connection to it. But yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah, someone needs to do it, I think.
I'll get you anyone.
All right, cheers, guys. I'll leave you to it. But
cheers,
Thanks
Harry.
so much. Thank you so much.
no worries. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Good man.
Take care.
See you later, Ben.
Cheers, mate. Bye bye.